Here's a question that feels almost too obvious to bother asking, right up until you actually try to answer it. Why did ancient humans start cooking their food? Every other creature on this planet eats exactly what it finds. Wolves don't marinate a kill. Bears don't roast the fish they pull from a river. Not one dolphin has ever assembled anything you could fairly call a meal. And yet every human culture ever documented, without exception, on every continent, in every climate, at every level of technological development, cooks its food before eating it. Think about what that actually means. It is the one truly universal human behavior, not language, which varies wildly from group to group, not tool use, which plenty of other species manage in some form, not art, religion, or trade. Cooking. Heat deliberately applied to food before it ever reaches your mouth. Only humans do this, and every human population that has ever existed has done it. And here's the part that should genuinely stop you. We've been doing this so long that our bodies have quietly become dependent on it. In a way no other species depends on a piece of technology it uses. You don't cook mostly because it tastes better, although it does, dramatically. You cook because, in a testable and measurable sense, you cannot survive without doing it. Your body has been physically rebuilt over an enormous stretch of evolutionary time into a shape that assumes cooked food is already on its way. Your jaw generates a fraction of the force a chimpanzee's jaw can produce. Your gut runs shorter. Your teeth are smaller. Your enamel thinner. Your whole digestive blueprint differs from our closest primate relatives, all of it pointing toward the same conclusion. A body engineered around food that fire has already gotten to first. None of that is a design flaw. It's a record, physical proof carved into your skeleton that some ancestor made. One of the most consequential decisions in the history of life on this planet, and then had their descendants' bodies quietly reorganized around it. Generation after generation, for roughly the next million years. Let's rewind to what things looked like before any of this, because the before is what makes the afterland so hard. Roughly 2 million years ago, our lineage sat at something close to a fork in the road. Australopithecus, upright, increasingly clever, spread across the African savanna, was still running essentially the same dietary program a modern chimpanzee runs today. Raw fruit, raw roots tough and stringy, raw bark, raw shoots, the occasional small kill. That diet demanded an almost unbelievable amount of chewing. A wild chimpanzee spends close to half of every waking hour doing nothing but processing food in its mouth. Not hunting, not resting, not anything resembling complex social behavior, just grinding fibrous plant matter down, mouthful after mouthful. Because raw food gives up its calories grudgingly, with no shortcut around the mechanical labor required to reach them. Harvard primatologist Richard Wrangham didn't just theorize about this from a comfortable distance. He traveled to Uganda and ate what wild chimpanzees eat for extended stretches. His account was almost comically restrained. Tough, bitter, exhausting. After long, steady chewing on a single piece of wild fruit, almost nothing worthwhile to show for it. That left him with a conviction that reshaped his entire research career. A human body, with our comparatively weak jaw and short gut, simply could not survive long-term on that raw ancestral diet. Wouldn't enjoy it. Could not physically extract enough usable energy from it to keep a functioning human alive over time. Which raised an obvious problem. If our bodies can't run on what our ancestors ate 2 million years ago, something changed between then and now. Something delivered far more usable energy per mouthful. Something freed our ancestors from spending half their lives with their jaws working. Something drove the exact anatomical shift visible in the fossil record, separating our genus from everything before it. Wrangham's answer reached while staring into his own fireplace in Massachusetts in 1997, was cooking. Not the shift toward eating more meat. Not bigger brains that figured out cleverer foraging. Cooking. Fire applied to food before a single bite. His argument wasn't that cooking was a pleasant bonus that arrived once. Humans got smart enough to invent it. Cooking was the engine itself. We didn't evolve large brains and then stumble onto cooking. We started cooking, probably by accident, and our brains grew as a direct consequence. The cause and effect run backward from what most people assume. To understand why, you need to look at what heat actually does to food. Because the transformation goes far deeper than most people ever consider, and the evolutionary logic is hiding in those exact chemical details. Take a starchy food, a yam, a root, a grain, raw. Its starch sits packed into dense, tightly wound granules that digestive enzymes can barely grip. Apply heat in those granules, absorb water and swell open. A process called gelatinization. What was locked becomes accessible. Same object, same weight, dramatically more energy extracted. Protein undergoes something just as dramatic. Raw meat is bound by tough structural fibers, collagen among them that resist even strong stomach acid. Heat denatures those fibers, unraveling their structure into simpler strands. Your enzymes can tear through easily. Heat neutralizes many of the natural toxins sitting inside raw food, compounds that plants and animal tissue carry specifically to make themselves harder or more dangerous to eat. Applying heat destroys a meaningful share of that defensive chemistry, opening up food sources that were genuinely risky in their raw state. And then there's the Maillard reaction, the browning process behind seared meat, toasted crust, roasted vegetables, tasting like entirely different substances from their raw equivalents. That reaction generates brand new compounds that weren't present in the raw ingredient at all, some of which your gut absorbs with far less effort than the originals. Stack gelatinization, denaturation, detoxification, and the Maillard reaction together, and cooking stops looking like a matter of taste and starts looking like outsourced digestion. Fire does a genuine share of the chemical labor before food reaches your mouth. Your gut spends far less energy finishing the job. And then there's the time. Wrangham estimates pre-cooking hominids spent something close to half their waking hours simply chewing. Once cooked food became routine, that number collapsed toward roughly the single. Our modern humans typically spend eating per day 4 or 5 extra usable hours every single day, freed from the mechanical necessity of grinding down enough raw material just to stay alive. Repeated across hundreds of thousands of years, consider what your ancestors could do with that reclaimed time. Hunt with more coordination, build better tools, maintain relationships, teach the next generation, sleep longer and more safely, since fire kept nighttime predators at a distance, letting a group rest together on open ground rather than scattered defensively in trees. The campfire wasn't just a cooking device, it was a security perimeter, a source of warmth stretching the range of livable habitats, a gathering point that made sustained group contact possible, and a time-generating technology whose benefits compounded across every generation that inherited it. Now here's the part that should genuinely stop you cold. What actually happened to the human body right around the period? Cooking is believed to have started somewhere around 1.8 million years ago. Something fairly abrupt shows up in the fossil layers. Homo erectus appears. And compared to what came before, the differences are stark. A noticeably larger brain relative to body size, a taller frame, longer legs built for sustained movement, and critically, a smaller jaw, smaller teeth, and a meaningfully shorter gut. That gut change may be the single most striking anatomical shift in our entire fossil record. In chimpanzees and most other primates, the digestive tract is enormous relative to body size, built around a large stomach and colon, dedicated to slowly fermenting huge volumes of tough, low-calorie plant material. In Homo erectus, that expensive apparatus shrinks. There's really only one way a species can afford that. Incoming food has to require far less processing for the same energy. In most primates, gut outweighs brain by a wide margin. In modern humans, that relationship flips entirely. Less gut, more brain, a metabolic budget being reallocated, and the timing lines up closely with the shift toward cooked food. Now here's the fire did to human social structure in ways that went far beyond the meal itself. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner of the University of Utah spent decades studying the Juaring-Wanzisan people of the Kalahari, one of the few remaining populations still living in ways that partially reflect pre-agricultural life. In 2014, she published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that did something deceptively simple. She recorded what people actually talked about depending on whether the sun was up or down. The results were striking. During daylight hours, roughly 80% of conversations were practical. Economic topics, complaints, work, food, plans, the stuff of daily survival management. Around the fire at night, the proportion flipped almost completely. Roughly 81% of nighttime conversation was stories, not practical exchange, narrative, characters, distant events, the deeds of ancestors, social histories, speculation about the spirit world. Wiesner's argument was that firelight didn't just extend the day. It created an entirely new social mode that didn't exist before fire. The campfire evening, belly full, predators held back by the flames, hours of non-chewing time available, produced a psychological and social environment that had never existed in the history of primate evolution. A safe, warm, calm space where the mind could range beyond immediate survival needs. And in that space, something emerged that may be the most consequential human capability of all. The ability to build shared fictional worlds, to talk about people and events not present, to construct collective identity through narrative, Language itself in the full human sense, not warning calls or status signals, but story, may have been born not from some abstract cognitive leap, but from the specific social environment the cooking fire created every single night. The fire didn't just feed the brain, it gave the brain something new to do with the time. And here's the third fact, the standard history almost always skips, one that lands uncomfortably close to home. We know cooking reshaped the human body over 1 million years of evolution, but researchers have recently discovered it's still reshaping us, on timescales far shorter than anyone expected. A 2021 study published in Science Advances examined skull morphology across human populations over the last 10,000 years and the period since agriculture and widespread cooking became universal. What they found was measurable. Ongoing reduction in jaw size and tooth size continuing right through recorded history. Not a change that happened once and stabilized. An active, ongoing process. Populations with longer histories of consuming heavily processed, cooked, and soft foods show measurably smaller jaws and teeth than populations with more recent transitions to agricultural diets. But the more striking finding came from orthodontic research running parallel to this work. The dramatic rise of malocclusion, teeth that don't fit properly in the jaw, the condition that has made orthodontists wealthy across the industrialized world and is almost entirely absent in pre-agricultural human skulls. Hunter-gatherer teeth fit their jaws with remarkable precision, crowding overbites, and the wisdom tooth impaction that now sends millions to oral surgeons every year were rare to non-existent for most of human evolutionary history. The culprit appears to be the texture of food. Jaw development in humans is not fixed at birth. It responds to mechanical loading during childhood. Chewing tough, fibrous, resistant food during the years of jaw development signals the bone to grow larger and wider. Chewing soft, cooked, processed food sends a weaker signal, and the jaw grows smaller. In other words, our cooking has gotten so efficient, our food so thoroughly pre-processed, that our jaws are no longer receiving the developmental stimulus. They need to grow large enough to fit our teeth. We have cooked ourselves into a dental crisis. The same process that freed our ancestors from spending half their lives chewing has, taken to its logical extreme in the modern food environment, begun removing the physical capacity to chew properly at all. Evolution set our jaws to expect a certain amount of resistance in food. We removed the resistance, and the jaw shrank to match. What isn't up for debate is what happens to a human body denied cooked food entirely. And this is where the deep past becomes something you can verify today. Long-term studies of people on a strictly raw, unheated diet consistently show progressive, unavoidable weight loss, because the body burns more energy processing raw food than it recovers from it. Close to half of women on a strict raw diet over an extended period stop menstruating altogether, a direct signal the body has judged its energy supply too unreliable for reproduction, and shuts that function down first. A diet that halts reproduction in roughly half the population. Attempting it isn't a lifestyle inconvenience. It's a diet that leads straight toward extinction inside a single generation. 1 million years of evolution have made us biologically dependent on a piece of technology. Remove the technology and we begin shutting down. That is how completely the campfire remade us. So the next time you're at the sink at some inconvenient hour scrubbing burnt rice off the bottom of a pot, take 1 second to register the weight of what you were just doing at that stove. You were carrying out the oldest continuous human behavior on Earth. The one that made the brain you're using to feel annoyed about the burnt rice possible in the first place. The one that freed your ancestors from a life spent almost entirely chewing. That built the evening, the story, the shared fictional world, the language capable of carrying it. That shrank the gut and grew the brain and then kept going and still reshaping the jaw, still changing the skull, still quietly rewriting the body right up to this moment. You didn't invent cooking. Cooking invented you, and it's not done yet.